Alan and Sean here from the Prancing Pony Podcast, welcoming you to the Tolkien Experience Podcast.
The Tolkien Experience Podcast is an attempt to bring the fan and scholarly communities together around our shared passion, the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Each episode features a notable scholar or member of the fan community sharing their Tolkien experience.
And now we'll send you over to Sarah and Luke.
Thanks, Alan. I'm Luke Shelton.
And I'm Sarah Brown.
Every other week, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any further delay, let me introduce our guest. My guest today is Jeremy Edmonds. Jeremy is known in many Tolkien circles as the creator of TolkienGuide.com. It's a fantastic website that brings together a lot of different collectors, fanatics, and scholars about Tolkien's work. And in 2019, it actually won the Tolkien Society Award for Best Website. In addition to creating a fantastic website, Jeremy is also just a really nice guy, and so I was really privileged to sit down and talk to him about his Tolkien experience. So Jeremy, for our first question, I'd like to ask you, how were you introduced to Tolkien's work?
So yeah, my parents were in college in the early to mid 60s and were very much a part, I think, of the Tolkien environment around that time, and got engaged right around 1965 or so when the paperback release from Ballantine came out, and my father gave my mother a set of the Lord of the Rings, actually some of the later printings of the first American edition. And it's got each one of the volumes has like a full page of very fine calligraphy writing from my dad to my mom as sort of an engagement gift. And so those and a copy of The Hobbit were sitting on their bookshelves, obviously, the whole time I was growing up. I don't remember when they first introduced me to or allowed me to read those particular books of theirs, but I was hooked on fantasy and science fiction probably around 6 or 7 years old, and got my hands on those and read them, all 4 of them, over and over, probably, I don't know, half dozen or a dozen times before high school even. So that would have been, pre-teenage, 10 years old and up or so, to the point where, looking back, I feel horrified to say this, but I completely destroyed the dust jackets on all of them. I was carrying them everywhere, and I feel really bad because now they're all naked on my parents' shelves. They still have them, and I still adore them, those particular copies, just because of the personal association. But yeah, I do wish I was a more gentle reader back when I was young.
Mm-hmm. That's a really remarkable story, and it's a lovely gesture from your father to your mother.
Yeah, they I can't remember. It's probably been 20 years since I've read the notes in them, but they definitely impacted me, the notes themselves, and obviously the story itself, and their kind of association with it. I really appreciate their supporting the young reader in me and setting me on this long journey with Tolkien.
Mm-hmm. So that brings up an interesting question to me, which is when you first got your hands on those books, personal connection that they had through the books and with each other through the books. Did you feel like you were falling into a world like a lot of other readers do, just kind of you and Tolkien, or did it feel like you were kind of going into a world with your parents at that point?
That's a fair question. I think probably not so much going in there with my parents. I feel like I'm envisioning the feeling again in myself, and sort of being shown the door and welcomed to it. But they're not big fantasy readers at all in general. I'm picturing the bookshelves as I remember them, and they were full of history, like nonfiction books, and they were both avid readers through college on just textbooks and philosophy and a lot of engineering and science for actually both of them. Mostly my dad was who went through graduate and postgraduate work. So they really stuck out, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit on these shelves. So and I didn't read anything else at that age. I was pretty much fantasy and science fiction only. So I really thank them for opening the door for me, but I feel like I kind of left them behind fairly quickly.
Well, I know that you've left a lot of us behind with your penchant for collecting, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So was that your first reading? Was that your fondest reading experience of Tolkien, or does another experience of Tolkien's work stand out to you more?
It's they all blend together, the first readings and rereadings. I think it's set in me a tendency to reread books that I love. In particular, The Lord of the Rings, I come back to pretty much every year for many, many years now. And I think this was kind of the books that set me on that path of just discovering more and more each time. So I don't have many clear memories at all of childhood. They all blur together, but so I don't remember the exact first reading, but I do find similar feelings every time I go in and read it, of just the familiarity and the love of revisiting and obviously discovering new things every time I read it.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you kind of come back and reread it year after year. What is it that pulls you back to the book? What really sticks with you and makes you want to go back again?
It's a feeling, I think, of like visiting a vacation home a little bit, in that it feels very familiar and warm and welcoming, and a place, location specifically. I love Tolkien's descriptions of locale and geography and the peoples, and the plot is obviously very well worn into grooves at this point in my mind. So that's not the main draw, although I think it is, a wonderful story and so well crafted. But it's every time I think I'm finding things that I really appreciate more. I think I've mentioned this online a couple of times. I struggle with the poetry a lot, and it's not just Tolkien, it's just the way my overly analytical brain works. And I'm finding as I age and go back to it again and again, it really helps to have both that familiarity, but also the better exposure, and really having it make more sense as I go through it again and again. And then the languages as well. I'm not a big language expert at all. I can't read the Tengwar, but I feel now that's something that's drawing me in more than was previously. And then the people who go in, good friends of mine now, quite a few of them, who are absolutely experts in these, and really understanding what they're finding from it, and then starting to explore that myself. It's like a whole new world again to me to try and learn and pick up on that. So it's an interesting experience every time, and I don't know what I'll find in it, and I'm always pleasantly surprised.
So you've actually kind of started answering my next question about the way that your experience of Tolkien has changed over time. You mentioned the linguistics and the poetry specifically already, but has anything else changed for you in the way that you approach Tolkien's work over time?
I think, well, it's actually a very timely question. I've just been working my way through John Garth's new book that just came out recently, and the amazing depth of the material that was rounded up by Tolkien, and whether consciously or unconsciously pulled into the world of Middle Earth of his is really fascinating to me, and I've been really getting a lot out of that book, and it's really it's full of footnotes and cross references, and then references to other materials. So I have a feeling it's going to keep me busy for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that our listeners might know about you is that you run an award-winning Tolkien site. Have you felt like that has influenced the way that you interact with Tolkien's work at all?
It's an interesting question. I'd say the site has, it's mostly fairly casual. It's not where I envisioned when I started it. It's certainly been a great community of fellow collectors and other scholars in the field who enjoy hanging out together. I think that having it grow into what it is the last couple of years has certainly opened a lot of doors, both with myself trying to do some deeper research to answer questions that I've come across, and then writing those up and getting feedback from other people, but also just in the people who have become friends, both through the site and through the Tolkien Society and the Mythopoeic Society, to just have the sense of camaraderie and community and the encouragement to explore.
Yeah, that's similar to my experience, that just starting to get into this community, I felt like the scholars particularly were very generous with their time and expertise. So, having a question and actually being able to ask it and have an answer and not be judged if it's a silly question. Not that any of your questions are silly. My questions are very silly sometimes.
You have no idea. I ask some ridiculously arcane and trivial questions, so I don't judge.
But I have found it to be a very warm community as well. So my last question that I normally ask to my text readers is, would you ever recommend Tolkien's work to someone else? And why or why not?
Absolutely. I try and recommend it to everyone who's looking for recommendations of books to read. I don't think I've ever surprised anyone. Most of them, especially if they've ever been in my house, know I'm a little bit obsessed. And most of them ask why. They're interested in very much the kinds of questions that you and I are talking about now, to understand better what pulls me in so much like this. I have two teenage kids who they've never gotten into it, and they question me on it, and they have their own reading, which I love, and they're all unique in their own ways. But it's interesting in my mind to see if I've overexposed them at this point to drive them off of it, and they want to be independent, which I fully respect. So I'm just patiently waiting. I have a feeling they will enjoy it when they come around, but I think I've kind of driven them off of it, not overtly, but just from them wanting to not fall into the same trench that I'm so clearly in.
The air is saturated around your house.
Exactly. They're finding their own books, which I deeply appreciate.
So we've kind of talked a little bit around your website. Would you maybe want to share the name of your website and what people would find if they were to go there?
Absolutely. It's tolkienguide.com. It's primarily focused on collecting Tolkien-related books, primarily. At certain points in its history, there's also been some focus on a lot of movie-related materials. Was briefly there more than a decade ago. It's all still there for the finding through search engines, but the community's really settled around book collecting, and then fanzine and fan publications is another particular area that I think it has a lot of information on that's useful. It's interesting. The world's kind of changing from when I started the site 18 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't remember exactly when. It was early 2000s, back in the movie hype. We had some other forums that fell apart, so I started a new one for all of the people who already knew each other to continue chatting with each other. But it's primarily, I think it's a gathering of people who very much enjoy the books and enjoy collecting them and know a lot of very minute details about them. So we get our regular core of probably 40 or 50 people who hang out there, and then quite a number of first-timers who come in with questions they need help on, and then everybody helps them out. And they're occasionally people will go over the hub from wanting to have a second or third copy to the ridiculousness that I've fallen into.
So, as someone who is the proprietor of a collection website, I have to ask, what is the most unique item in your Tolkien collection?
So, fair question. I would have to say at the top of my head, I have what appears to be a full run, according to memory of people at the time, of a fanzine from the mid-1960s called Glyph. There are like 5 or 6 issues total. One of them's numbered 0, I think. And they are all written in Tengwar. There's no English at all. All the submissions, the editorial, all the articles, everything was done in Tengwar. It's a little bit rough around the edges compared to what you'll find today, because they were all trying to learn it from the appendices and doing the best they could. But as far as I know, as far as the creator knows, etc., there's no other copies that have survived. So it's very, very much unique at this point. And mentioning it here might hopefully shake out a few more copies, because I know there's other people who would really like to have them. But
that sounds fascinating. I can't imagine being on that editorial board like, oh, is this line in the right place? Or
yeah, it's and as a fanzine, it was probably the poor editor would get his submissions, and he would make stencil copies of them and mimeo off the 20 or 30 copies that he had subscribers for and sent them off. So it's really a unique small window into part of what fandom was like back in that time frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds fascinating. So I want to thank you for being here, and I have just one more question for you. In addition to the website, are there any other ways that our listeners could engage with you about Tolkien or Tolkien-related things?
Well, I have. I'm on Twitter. I spend most of my social media time that's Tolkien-related over there. It's also Tolkien Guide in there. I'm on Facebook. I think I have many hundreds of friends that I only know through the Tolkien space on Facebook. So I'm always happy to meet new people and converse with them. I'd love to help. I don't mind interacting with fellow collectors or collectors who would like to be, or talk about anything really. We had, I want to say 6 or 9 months ago, when the Lord of the Rings on Prime was announced, that caused a large amount of interest in fan groups, and I was lucky enough to get some responses from them on some of the technical problems they had in the maps they made. So we had a bit of a chat about that. They fixed the maps, and that got me a bit of notoriety in that circle as well. So I'm trying to stay on top of it. They're not releasing much information at all to me or to the public. Looking forward to seeing what they do further there, though.
Mm-hmm. So how do you put map spot checker on your CV?
That's a fair question. I think I'd probably phrase it somewhat similarly to that, but it was it spawned a lot of very, very long, lengthy conversations that I enjoyed having. But yeah, it's all in good fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do without trying to prejudge. I know it's a contentious topic in a large amount for the fan community of who's looking forward to who's not, but I have an open mind.
Well, I thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and your answers were phenomenal. I really enjoyed hearing about your Tolkien experience.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed having the conversation as well.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We have a lot of fun making these podcasts.
So much fun. It's always exciting to talk to fans and scholars about their Tolkien experience.
If you want to know more about the ways to connect with this episode's guest that they mentioned in this interview, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favourite social media sites.
That's right. We're on Facebook as Tolkien Experience, and also on Twitter as @TolkienEXP. So don't forget to like, follow, share, and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking with our guests. You can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I am @LukeB.Shelton.
You can also look for me on Twitter, where I am @AaronL.Palmadill. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.